She was sent instead of her sibling as a bride, but his little girl said, "God sent you after all." Green Hollow, Colorado, autumn of 1883. The wind had turned sharp in the mountain town, carrying whispers of snow to come and misfortune that clung to certain names. The Barrett house stood on the edge of town, its shutters rattling with every gust. Inside, Abigail Barrett, 20, stood in the parlor with her travel bag clutched in both hands. Her stepmother, Miriam, loomed across from her, arms folded, eyes cold with resolve. "You will go, Abigail," Miriam said. "And you will go today?" Abigail's pulse thundered. "He asked for Alois, not me." "Alois is 17, Miriam snapped. "Do you think I would send her to some widower with a child and a mule for a house? You are older, more practical." "She's your daughter," Abigail whispered, "and you are not." The words stung more than a slap. Abigail glanced toward the staircase, hoping Alois might descend and protest. But her half-sister stayed hidden. Alois had always been adored. Abigail couldn't blame her for staying silent, though the silence felt like betrayal. "I will not pretend to be her." Abigail tried again. "You won't need to pretend much," Miriam replied. "Just use her name. Hell be grateful anyone came at all." In Miriam's hand was the letter. Abigail had read it countless times. The handwriting was firm, plain. Thomas Grant, 35, widower, father to a 6-year-old girl. He lived in Wyoming in a place called Willow Creek. One line stayed etched in her mind. "I offer nothing but honesty, a roof, and kindness." Her heart had stirred at those words, but Miriam was ruthless. "Stay, and you'll scrub floors the rest of your life. Go, and you might have a roof to call your own." So she packed her few things, kissed Alois's cheek through tears, and climbed into the stagecoach bound west. The journey stretched for days. Dust curled behind the wheels, the nights were cold, the air thin. Abigail kept the letter pressed in her palm under her coat like a compass. She whispered, "Please, let him be decent. Let the child be kind. Let this not be the end of me." When the coach finally stopped at Willow Creek, the sun was low, gilding the hills in red and gold. Abigail stepped down, bracing herself for a shack or a sagging barn, proof of the rumors. Instead, she froze. Before her stood a wide log house with green shutters and a porch lined with drying herbs. The barn was sturdy, the fences mended. Chickens pecked the ground, smoke curled from the chimney, rich with the scent of stew. This was no place of ruin. Then she saw him. Thomas Grant walked from the barnyard, rolling down his sleeves. He was tall, broad, shouldered, sun-darkened and strong, not old, not frail. Flour-dusted one arm. His eyes blue steady met hers. He removed his hat. "You must be Miss Barrett Alois." The name caught in her throat. She forced a nod. "Yes." A smile touched his lips. "You're early. That's a good sign." From the doorway, a little girl peeked out. 2 braids, freckles, then hid behind Thomas's leg. "This is Leah," he said. "She's shy, but she has a big heart." Abigail's throat tightened. The child's eyes were wary and hopeful, and it rattled her more than she expected. Thomas stepped closer, offering to take her bag. Their fingers brushed, and warmth spread through her, even as shame prickled beneath her skin. She was not Alois. She was a substitute. Yet this man treated her with quiet, sincere kindness. "Come inside," he said. "Supper's ready." Rabbit stew. She followed him through the door. The smell of thyme and bread filled the air. Hearth light flickered across the floors. A rocking chair swayed gently. Recently used. Abigail lowered her head, overwhelmed. She had come under false pretenses, expecting a bleak future. But standing in this home, she felt something else strong, alive, and terrifyingly real. As Thomas closed the door behind her, she knew she had crossed into a life from which there was no turning back. The first evening in Thomas Grant's house carried a strangeness Abigail could not name. The warmth of the fire soothed her travel-worn bones, yet the weight of her secret pressed heavier with each passing hour. Thomas guided her to the dining table, where a steaming pot of stew sat waiting. He did not bombard her with questions, did not demand explanations. Instead, he spoke gently, as though easing her into this new life. "After supper, I'll show you your room," he said. "I thought you might prefer one of your own until you've had time to settle." Abigail glanced up quickly, startled. She had expected a man desperate enough to demand a wife's duties at once. Instead, he offered space. "Respect." "Thank you," she managed. Leah, the little girl, sat across from her, chin barely reaching above the table's edge. She kept sneaking looks at Abigail, only to dart her gaze away whenever Abigail noticed. Her braids were slightly uneven, her dress patched at the elbows. There was shyness in her small shoulders, but also something keen and watchful in her eyes. "Leela, say hello properly," Thomas encouraged. The girl's lips pressed together. She gave the barest nod. "That's enough for now," Thomas said with a smile. "She'll warm to you." Later, as dishes were cleared and the lamps lit, Thomas fetched a teapot from the stove. Abigail watched as he poured into 2 cups, steam curling between them. His movements were unhurried, practiced, as though he had done this ritual countless times. He slid a cup toward her. "Chamomile," he explained, "helps with travel weariness." Abigail wrapped her hands around the warm clay and felt something stir inside her. She had not been offered such small tenderness in years. He was a man of quiet actions, and each one unsettled her expectations. When he showed her to a room upstairs, she found it neatly prepared. A quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a basin of water set on a stand, curtains drawn against the chill night. "If you need anything," Thomas said, standing in the doorway, "just knock on the wall." "My room's next to yours," she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That night, as the wind pressed against the windows, Abigail lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. The guilt of her deception gnawed, but it was muted by the strange comfort of this place, by the thought of a man who offered her kindness without demand. It was past midnight when she heard a soft sound. At first she thought it was the wind, but then she realized it was footsteps. Hesitant and small, the door creaked open and Leah appeared, holding a small object close to her chest. Abigail sat up quickly. "La, is something wrong?" The girl shook her head. She patted across the floor and placed something on the bedside table. In the glow of the dying lamp, Abigail saw it clearly. A tiny rag doll worn from years of clutching, its button eyes loose but still intact. "For you," Leah whispered, voice barely above breath. Abigail blinked, stunned. "For me?" The child nodded, her face solemn. Then she turned and hurried back to the door before Abigail could say more. When the door closed, Abigail touched the doll with trembling fingers. It was not a grand gift, but it was more precious than gold. It was trust. The days that followed unfolded in quiet rhythm. Abigail helped in the kitchen, read stories aloud from an old book Thomas had kept, and learned the small ways of household. Leah stayed near, still shy, yet always watching with those bright, intelligent eyes. One evening, when the fire crackled low, Abigail sat with Leah tucked beneath her arm, reading a story about stars and angels. The girl listened, her head resting against Abigail's shoulder, lashes heavy with sleep. Just before drifting off, she murmured words that sank deep into Abigail's soul. "I prayed for a mama. God sent you after all." Abigail froze, breath-catching, tears springing unbidden to her eyes. She kissed the top of the child's hair, her heart breaking and mending all at once. For the first time, she felt she belonged, not because of a name she wore, but because of the love of a child who believed in her. Spring thaw came slowly to the valley. Snow melted into rivulets that wound through hills, softening the earth beneath worn boots. Abigail began to find her rhythm on this land, the patience it required, the quiet strength it offered back. Each morning, Thomas invited her to the garden behind the barn. He showed her how to turn the soil, where to plant squash and beans, how to trim the berry bushes along the fence. He never ordered or corrected, only guided with steady hand and quieter eyes. "You'll have your own patch soon," he said one morning, brushing dirt from his palms. "Whatever you want to grow." Abigail smiled. "What if I'm no good at it? Then we'll grow weeds." "They're loyal," she laughed fully, and the sound surprised them both. He looked at her with something unreadable, and she turned away, cheeks warm. Evenings were her favorite. After Lily had been kissed and tucked in, Abigail and Thomas sat on the porch as dusk washed over the hills. Sometimes they talked about books or chores, sometimes nothing at all. The silence between them felt alive. Like spring, ready to bloom, one afternoon, Thomas stepped inside from the barn and said, "We're going into town tomorrow." Abigail looked up for supplies. He hesitated. "And for you?" She blinked. "Me." "You deserve more than one threadbare dress," he said. "If you're to be part of this family, you ought to feel like you belong." She wanted to object. She didn't feel like she had the right, but a deeper part of her, the hungry part, longed to say yes. The next day they rode into Green Hollow. His coat was wrapped around her shoulders. People greeted Thomas with warmth and familiarity, and Abigail realized he was known, respected. Even the store clerk stood straighter when he entered. He picked out 2 dresses, one pale blue, one golden like wheat, a sturdy pair of boots, a ribbon. Her hair, Abigail murmured once. "You don't have to." "I know," he replied softly. "I want to." At the jeweler's he chose a delicate gold necklace with a small carved poppy. "It means hope," the jeweler explained. "Hope from sorrow." Thomas looked at her. "May I?" She only nodded. He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers careful. She touched the pendant where it lay against her chest. It felt impossibly light and impossibly heavy. Back at the homestead, she stood before the mirror in her new dress. The necklace caught the light. She looked like someone she didn't recognize, but maybe someone she could become. Guilt tugged at her. This wasn't hers to claim. It belonged to a name she wasn't born with. Each time Thomas looked at her with that quiet tenderness, the ache in her chest deepened. She was living a lie, and yet it felt more real than anything she'd known. One evening, Thomas joined her on the porch. Lily was inside, humming softly. The valley stretched before them, bathed in gold and bird song. He turned to her. "Do you know what I thought when I buried my wife?" Abigail's breath caught. He had never spoken of her. "I thought my life's color had ended." But lately he paused, voice hushed. "The light is back." She looked at him, stunned. He met her eyes. "You brought that light, Abigail." Her hands curled in her lap, her lips parted, ready to confess, but the words caught. Guilt still throbbed beneath her ribs, but longing was louder. She said nothing, and still Thomas smiled as if her silence was answer enough. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, soft and unhurried. Abigail found herself looking forward to the clatter of morning hooves, the warmth of sunlight through kitchen windows, the smell of pine wood smoke curling from the chimney. Happiness crept in, not the kind that arrived with fireworks and declarations, but the kind that slowly took root, growing with every shared meal, every laugh from Lily, every glance from Thomas that lingered just a little longer. She began to sew small things, napkins, pillow covers, a delicate handkerchief for Lily, with tiny violets stitched into the corner. The little girl loved it so much she refused to let it out of her sight. In the evenings, Abigail would read aloud from the book Thomas kept on a shelf by the fireplace. Lily would curl beside her with wide eyes, occasionally resting her head on Abigail's arm as she drifted towards sleep. Thomas always watched from his chair, a soft expression on his face. "You've made this house warmer," he said once, almost absent-mindedly as he stood beside her at the stove. "Feels like home again." When he said the word home, his voice was different, as if he wasn't just referring to the cabin, as if he meant her. Abigail smiled, but her heart pinched because she knew she wasn't who he thought she was. She wasn't Alois. She hadn't responded to his letter, hadn't written those sweet, careful replies. She had come in place of someone else. And every day she waited for the truth to break loose like a bucking stallion, trampling everything she had come to love. At night she lay awake long after the lamps were blown out. Sometimes she stood at the window, watching the moonlight dance over the pastures, wondering how much longer she could keep pretending. Other times she would light a single candle and open the small journal she kept tucked beneath her bedroll. Her handwriting slanted with the weight of confession. I love them. I love him. And yet I cannot breathe beneath this lie. I am not Alois. She closed the journal with trembling fingers, sealing the words away like a sin half buried in dirt. Each time Thomas looked at her with quiet affection, guilt twisted in her gut, and yet he never pushed. He never questioned why her eyes flickered away, why she sometimes went quiet in the middle of a laugh, or why she stood so long at the edge of Lily's bed after the child had fallen asleep. He gave her space, he gave her trust, and that made it harder. She wanted to tell him she meant to, but then Lily would grab her hand with that tiny smile and whisper, "Will you read the rabbit story again?" Or Thomas would place a warm mug of tea beside her elbow and say, "You look tired, sweetheart." And the words would vanish from her lips like steam rising from the cup. One night, as the wind rustled the shutters and the fire burned low, Abigail sat at the kitchen table alone, tracing the stitching on the cloth beneath her fingers. She whispered to the empty room, "If I tell the truth, will they still love me?" The silence answered, but in her heart, she knew that soon, very soon, she would have to find out. The wind carried the scent of rain, thick and heavy, as thunder rumbled over the Wyoming hills. Abigail stood at the window, drying her hands on a linen towel after tending the herbs in the kitchen. Lily was playing on the rug, her tiny voice singing off key as she dressed her wooden dolls. Knocks sounded at the door, sharp, deliberate, and unfamiliar. Thomas crossed the room, opened the door. Standing on the porch were two women, both strangers to him, but one made Abigail's heart stop cold. She knew those eyes, that smirk. "Alois," Abigail whispered, voice barely audible. All Alois was dressed in a gown far too fine for the dusty road. Pale blue silk with ivory trim, a parasol in hand though the sky was gray with storm. Her hair gleamed gold in the light, styled in intricate curls. Behind her stood Martha Linwood, her stepmother, stiff and smiling tightly as if this were a polite visit. "Mr. Thomas Grant," Martha said sweetly, her voice oily. "I hope you'll forgive this intrusion. We've traveled quite far. This is my daughter, Alois. We're looking for a girl who's gone missing, her stepsister." "We heard she might be here." Thomas frowned slightly, eyes narrowing. "I'm Alois," the girl in silk said, stepping forward with a curtsy. "And I believe you've been deceived." Abigail stood frozen in the archway, Lily clutching her hand. "I'm sorry," Alois continued, pressing her gloved hand to her chest. "I didn't know what she'd done until too late. She intercepted your letters. She left home pretending to be me. I was worried sick." Thomas looked at Abigail now, face unreadable. "Is this true?" Abigail stepped forward slowly, her voice calm but hollow. "The letters came in her name." "That part is true, but I didn't steal them. I was sent forced, really. But everything since I arrived, every word, every gesture has been mine. No one else's." Alois made a wounded sound, stepping closer to Thomas. "She's always wanted what I had. Dresses, attention, affection. I never thought she'd take something like this." "Something like what?" Thomas asked, his voice quiet. "You, this place, a life meant for me." Abigail's breath caught, her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. "Not now. She can have the name," Abigail said. "She can have the gowns and letters and whatever she's come to claim, but she can't have what I felt, what I feel." Thomas turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I trusted you. I never lied about how I felt," Abigail replied, standing straighter. That doesn't change what you are, Martha snapped, stepping in. A liar by omission or not, you played house, and now you've been found out. Lily clung tighter to Abigail's skirt. Mama, Abigail knelt, brushing Lily's cheek. It's okay, sweetheart, you are never the lie. Thomas's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Eloise placed her hand gently on his arm. I can make this right. I'll stay for Lily for you. I do not even know who you are, Thomas said, still staring at Abigail. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud, but it shattered her. She nodded once. Then I won't burden you any longer. She turned, gathered the few things she had in silence, kissed Lily's forehead one last time, and stepped out into the night. The rain started slowly, soft at first, then harder. By the time she reached the end of the path, her dress clung to her skin, and her boots squelched with every step. She didn't look back, because looking back might undo her. But her heart remained in that house, in the kitchen with warm tea, in the rocking chair by the hearth. In every bedtime story, she had whispered to a child who had claimed her as a mother. She was leaving everything she had ever longed for behind. And yet she held her head high, because even if he no longer saw her, she knew who she was. And she had never loved a single thing in her life with more truth than she had loved them. The storm had passed, but the house felt colder than ever. Lily had not spoken a word since Abigail left. She refused the biscuits Thomas baked for her that morning, only shook her head when offered tea. Eloise had attempted to approach her with a painted smile and a new porcelain doll, but Lily had shrunk away like a frightened foe. She is just shy, Eloise had said, brushing her curls over her shoulder. She will warm up to me. But Lily did not. She retreated to the barn, wrapped in a shawl too thin for Spring's linger. Chill, cradling the ragged cloth doll Abigail had mended for her weeks ago. Thomas found her there, curled against the hay, silent. Lily, he said gently, kneeling beside her, what's going on? Sweetheart. She turned away at first, burying her face into the straw, but then she whispered something. The president, however, had ceased to acknowledge her. The straw had been removed, and her face had been buried, too. She lied. He leaned in. Who lied? Pumpkin. Lily's voice cracked as she turned to face him. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the cold, but from something deeper. She lied. That lady in the pretty dress. She says she's Eloise, but she's not the real mama. Thomas's heart stopped. Lily blinked up at him. The real mama sings about the stars. Thomas's breath hitched. He had heard Abigail sing once, soft and off-key, as she folded laundry near the fire, singing a lullaby about the stars shining on lonely wanderers. He had stood in the doorway that night, listening, struck by the rawness of it. And what makes you think she's your real mama? He asked, voice barely steady. Lily looked down at the doll because she stayed. She held me when I had bad dreams. She made me laugh when you were sad. She said my drawings were magic. She paused, sniffled. I prayed for her, and she came. Thomas stood slowly, throat tight. He left the barn without another word and walked straight to the guest room that had once been Abigail's. The bed had not been touched since she left. Everything was neat, folded. He opened the drawer beside the bed and found it, the worn, leather-bound journal Abigail often scribbled in before bed. He had never intended to read it, but now he needed the truth. He opened the first page. I never meant to lie. I only meant to survive. Each page was window into her heart. Lines about her fear when she first arrived, about the guilt that clawed at her chest every time Thomas looked at her with kindness, about the way Lily's laughter became her favorite sound, the joy of being called home, the fear of being found out, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful love she had begun to feel for both of them. By the final entry, tears blurred his vision. I will leave if he asks, but I hope he remembers that what I gave was real, all of it. He closed the book, clutching it to his chest. Abigail had never once claimed something that was not hers. She had simply lived and loved the best way she knew how. It was not the name she used that defined her, but the truth in her heart, in her hands, in her care for them, and he had sent her away. Thomas didn't hesitate. He ran to the stable, threw a saddle over his black jelling, and rode hard into the night. The wind howled in his ears, rain whipping across his face as the sky opened again. He did not know where she had gone, only that he would find her. Mile after mile he scanned the road, calling her name into the darkness. And then, near the edge of the woods, a small figure stumbled along the muddy path, wrapped in a cloak soaked through. He pulled the reins hard. Abigail. She turned, eyes wide. Her face was pale, hair plastered to her skin by rain. Her lips parted, but no words came. Thomas jumped down, striding toward her through the storm. "I do not care what name you used," he said, voice breaking. "You were always you, and that's who I love." Abigail blinked, stunned. "I know who wrote those letters," he continued, "but I also know who stitched Lily's doll, who planted violets near the porch, who stayed up reading with a child who had never known a mother's touch." He stepped closer. "You are not just a name in ink. You are every moment of warmth this house ever knew again. You, Abigail, are the truth I needed." Abigail's breath hitched. "Even if I lied by silence, you never lied in love." She stared at him for a moment longer, then fell into his arms. The storm rolled on above them, but beneath it, something healed. The next morning, a light mist clung to the hills outside the town of Willow Ridge. The depot was quiet, saved for the low hiss of steam as the early train prepared to leave. Abigail stood on the wooden platform, a single carpet bag by her side, heart heavier than anything she could carry. She had said goodbye in her heart already, to Lily, laughter, to Thomas's hands wrapped gently around a teacup, to the scent of pine and fresh bread in the kitchen that never truly felt borrowed. She was letting it all go. The whistle blew and Abigail stepped toward the train only to hear hooves thunder behind her. "Abigail." She froze. Thomas jumped from his saddle, boots landing hard on the platform. Rain still clung to his coat from the night ride, but his eyes were steady, clearer than they had ever been. "I was going to let you go," he said, breathing hard. "But then I realized I don't want to just be the man who watched you walk away." Abigail's eyes welled, but she stayed rooted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a gold chain glinting in the morning light, the poppy pendant, the one he had bought weeks ago. "I bought this before I knew your real name, before I understood anything," he said softly, "but I still meant it. I bought this for the woman who made my daughter believe in angels again." Abigail covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "It was never about a name," he continued. "It was about how you made us feel like home again. I do not care what name you wore when you arrived. I care who you are when you smile at my daughter, when you hum while cooking, when you hold your breath just before you say something kind." She took a trembling step forward. "I did not think I deserved any of this," she whispered. He smiled gently. "You deserve every bit of it." And then, without hesitation, he lowered to one knee right there on the train platform. "Abigail Grace," he said, offering her the necklace as though it were a crown, "will you come home, not as a bride sent by mistake, but as the woman I choose, the woman Lily prays for my wife?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will come home." They returned that afternoon. The sun dipped golden over the hills as they rode back into the ranch yard. The door flung open before Thomas could even call out. Lily stood barefoot on the porch, eyes wide, then ran full speed into Abigail's arms. "You came back," she cried, wrapping her arms around her waist. "I promised I would if I could." Abigail whispered into her hair. Thomas stood back, watching, something reverent in his gaze. 2 days later, beneath the flowering cotton woods behind the barn, they married. There were no crowds, no carriages, no orchestra, only the breeze in the trees. Lily placed a wild flower crown on Abigail's head and handed her a bouquet of daisies and clover. Abigail's dress was simple linen and lace. chosen by Lily from the chest of her late mother's belongings, then carefully fitted by the local seamstress. Thomas took her hands under the filtered sunlight and said, "I choose you today and every day that comes after." Abigail replied, voice shaking with joy, "And I choose this home, this life you." The wind carried their vows away into the sky. It seemed the trees themselves leaned closer to listen. And somewhere deep in the quiet, a girl once forgotten by her family became a woman cherished by her own. Summer ripened gently over the hills of Wyoming, painting the meadows in waves of gold and green. The Grant Ranch bloomed not just with crops and wild flowers, but with something quieter, deeper peace. Abigail stood on the porch in the early morning light, swaying gently as she cradled a baby boy in her arms. His dark curls peeked beneath the knit cap, and his small fist clung to the front of her dress, as if claiming her as his own. Inside, the sound of laughter danced from the kitchen. "Mama, he ate my biscuit." Abigail smiled as Lily's voice rang out, indignant and full of joy. In truth, the baby had only drooled on it, but to Lily, he was already a rival, a companion, a little brother who belonged as much to her as to the home they shared. "Mama," Lily had whispered, the first time the boy was placed in her arms, "we're really a family now." That word "mama" came so easily to the girl now. It was stitched into every story time, every good night kiss, every skin-knee comfort. It had never needed to be earned, only lived into. And Abigail had done that with every breath. Thomas stepped out onto the porch with a coffee in hand, his hair still tousled from sleep. "She's still bossing everyone around in there?" he asked with a smirk. Abigail chuckled. "Lily runs this ranch, make no mistake." He kissed her temple and looked down at their son. "Looks like he's starting to take after her already." They stood there for a long moment, just watching the sky wake. A few months ago, Eloise had left the territory in shame. Her attempts to sway the town had failed when too many neighbors stepped forward with stories of Abigail's quiet kindness, teaching the school children how to read, sitting with a grieving widow, baking pies for a sick neighbor. The truth had a way of taking root where goodness grew. No one remembered Eloise's dresses now, but they remembered the woman who showed up, stayed, and stitched her heart into the very soul of Green Hollow. Later that week, Thomas sat by lamplight, writing a letter to an old friend in Colorado. His pen scratched slowly across the page. "You asked if the bride I ordered ever arrived. He didn't. I got someone else entirely. I got the woman who sang lullabies in the dark when my daughter had nightmares. The one who stitched wild flowers into the hem of an old dress just to make Lily smile. The woman who never asked for anything but gave everything. I got the bride I ordered. I got the woman I was meant to find, and that had made all the difference." He sealed the envelope and looked out the window where the porch light glowed soft on Abigail's silhouette, rocking the baby under the stars. Her name might not have been one written in the first letter, but it was the name that now echoed through their halls, spoken with love, whispered in dreams, and shouted in laughter. It was the name of home, and that's the end of. She was sent instead of her sibling as a mail-order bride. But his little girl said, "God sent you after all." If that ending touched your heart, hit that hype button and show this story some love. For more slow burn romance, frontier grit, and love that beats the odds, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the wide open prairie. Time, liberty, and until next time, partner, remember, the right person sometimes arrives under the wrong name, but love always knows the truth. See y'all soon.